Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Welcome to Safeguarding Conversations. In each episode, we explore the practical realities of safeguarding and the partnerships that help ensure children receive the support they need to feel safe, included, and able to achieve. And in today's episode, we're focusing on the role of the virtual school head and how schools work effectively with virtual schools to support children who are previously looked after, or who may otherwise require additional support to overcome barriers to learning. Understanding the role of the virtual head helps school leaders strengthen support systems, improve educational outcomes, and ensure safeguarding responsibilities are fully understood.
Yeah, the virtual school heads, they do play a very important role within the wider safeguarding and education system. Although the term can sometimes cause confusion, it does feel a bit strange term. Virtual schools are not teaching institutions. They are teams within local authorities responsible for promoting the educational outcomes of children in care and increasingly children who've previously been in care or may have additional vulnerabilities.
So the virtual school head has a strategic role rather than, a day-to-day role or a teaching role.
Yeah, exactly. So the virtual school head works at a strategic level to ensure that children who are looked after receive the support they need to achieve positive educational outcomes. And this includes working with schools to ensure appropriate support plans are in place, barriers to learning are well understood, and the child's wider circumstances are taken into account.
So it's helpful to recognise that children who are looked after may have experienced disruption, loss or instability, which can impact learning, relationships, and their well-being.
Yeah, many children in care, they have experienced significant change in their lives, including changes in home environment, school placement, or support networks. And these experiences, they really can affect confidence, emotional regulation, attendance, and engagement with learning.
And the school head helps ensure these factors are considered when planning support, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the virtual schools work closely with designated teachers, school leaders and other professionals who ensure that children receive appropriate educational provision. And this often includes contributing to the personal education plans, which are sometimes referred to as PEPs, PEPs, which set out the child's education, how it will be supported within the school.
And the designated teacher also plays an important role in coordinating that support, don't they, Sarah?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Every school must appoint a designated teacher for looked after children. And their key role is to promote the educational achievement of looked after children. And the designated teacher, works really closely with the virtual school and the virtual school head and the wider team, to really ensure appropriate support is in place and that child needs are understood.
So I'm guessing effective partnership working is central to that process.
Absolutely. Excuse me, I was just sneezing in the middle of a podcast here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I know supporting care experienced children often, it does really require a collaboration between education, social care and other services. And the virtual school head, they help ensure education remains a priority within that wider care planning process.
So this partnership approach reflects the understanding that educational progress is closely linked to well-being and stability, and educational success can play an important role in improving long-term outcomes for children in care.
Yeah, and supporting sort of consistent school experiences, as well as positive relationships and appropriate challenge, these can really help children build confidence and resilience.
And virtual schools, they may also provide guidance to schools about effective practice, with the virtual schools teams often providing advice, training, and resources to help schools understand how best to support children with care experience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this may include, guidance on trauma-informed practice, for example,
Yeah.
supporting transitions, promoting a sense of belonging within the school community.
Yeah, and transitions can be particularly important, when thinking about children in care or who've experienced care.
Oh, definitely. Transitions between schools or phases of education can be challenging for any child, but particularly, I think, for those who've already experienced change or disruption. So I
Mm.
think careful planning of transitions, really helps ensure continuity of support, and it helps children feel secure in their new environments.
Attendance and engagement, they can also be important indicators of how well children are being supported, aren't they, Sarah?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And schools and virtual school teams, they may work together to identify any particular barriers that do affect attendance or participation in learning. And I think any early identification of difficulty does really help ensure support can be put in place at the right time.
I think another important aspect of working with virtual school heads is understanding the use of pupil premium plus funding, the funding that's provided to support the educational outcomes of looked after children.
Yeah, and virtual school heads often oversee how that funding is used. And that
Right.
is really important because it ensures that it's targeted effectively to support individual needs.
So that then reinforces the importance of understanding the individual child's experience rather than applying a kind of one size fits all approach then.
Yeah, exactly. So children who are looked after are individuals, often with unique strengths, needs, and experiences. And support should always be tailored appropriately, recognizing both educational and emotional needs.
So we've talked about the voice of the child before, Sarah. The virtual school head also helps, ensure that the voice of the child is considered within the planning process. Don't they? Understanding of the child's views, and that helps ensure support is both meaningful and appropriate.
Oh, definitely. And feeling listened to, as it can really help a child feel valued and supported within their educational setting, obviously within an age appropriate way, of course.
Yeah. Working effectively, I'm just thinking working effectively with virtual schools also really supports safeguarding practice, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Because partnership working helps ensure that important information is shared appropriately and that children remain visible within support systems. And that strong communication between professionals helps ensure a consistent understanding of the child's needs. And it's also really helpful for school leaders to ensure that staff understand the role of the virtual school head and the responsibilities of the designated teacher.
Yeah, and I think that clarity of roles really does help ensure support is coordinated more effectively and that communication is consistent.
It's really interesting because I'm just wondering how interesting it would be, say, if you went into a school and and you individually asked members of staff, do you know what the role of a virtual school head is? I'm just
Yeah,
wondering how many of them would actually know.
absolutely.
'Cause, working with school heads involves collaboration, communication, and that shared commitment to improving outcomes for children. When schools and virtual schools work effectively together, those children are more likely to feel supported, included, which is a massive thing, and, have that ability to engage positively with their learning.
Exactly. It's interesting you talked about how, whether staff would know about the virtual school. The designated teacher for looked after is that bridge within a school. So I know that from my experience, my designated teacher for looked after was incredibly good. She was so on it. And she saw one of her roles as being the bridge between the virtual school and the mainstream school and talking to staff who had children who were looked after within their classes of the real impact and understanding what the virtual school does in terms of their oversight So I think it very much depends on the leadership and the designated teacher for looked after within a mainstream school to permeate that sort of communication and that role, so there's a clearer understanding amongst mainstream staff.
It's really interesting, Sarah, because as you were talking, I was just reflecting, having provided and worked collaboratively on site with schools for over 20 years, face to face. I mean, I've worked in safeguarding for a lot longer than that, but doing direct work where I was actually placed in school and we would be evaluating safeguarding practice. I think I could probably count on one hand the number of schools that volunteered me to meet with their designated looked after children designated person. I had to ask for it. So I still think there is something about, we do recognise looked after and previously looked after children as being at higher risk within a safeguarding context. I'm not convinced that it's seen as, really part of that or safeguarding role.
Yeah,
If you know what I mean.
yeah.
It's a little bit like, and I think that's one of the things, much as I think it's really good to have the coordination for all the reasons we've described, to have a designated person for looked after children, the same with designated person for mental health and wellbeing.
Yeah.
And our Senkos, all hugely important roles, but there is something still, I think, about there is a danger that when you have those roles in place, that things then they can become a little bit fragmented.
They can become a bit bolt-on rather than integral.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's possibly a little bit of work to do. And that's not to criticise the work that those roles do. It's about collectively how we regard them as part of the whole safeguarding, that whole collective responsibility.
Yeah, certainly in my experience, they became the integral part of what I would call the intervention team.
Yes.
So they met weekly. So your designated looked after teacher, the Senko, the attendance officer, the senior mental health lead, and core members of support. They all met weekly to look at the very large intervention team picture, so that there was, and safeguard, and the DSL obviously was integral to that as well. So it became a collective, holistic picture of all children. And then they were like the spokes of the same wheel. And I think it's about how you set your systems up so they're not bolt on, but they're integral to what's going on. And then you could review your most vulnerable children. And those children would be obviously reviewed regularly with what interventions do they need from different spokes of that wheel.
Yes, absolutely. And also, it's a really great vehicle for starting to recognise emerging risk as it could be escalating as well. I'm just thinking,
it's that whole aspect of inclusion, and it's wide, I think.
A very, very good model, isn't it? So, I mean, supporting care experienced children really does require thoughtful partnership working, and that's within the school setting as well as externally with external multi-agency partners. And it does require that shared understanding of the importance of stability, consistency, and encouragement. And, that really is supported by virtual school heads and the virtual school teams. So thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you found that informative and useful. You can find further information on our website, and you can get access to all our free resources there as well. Please join us next time, where we will be looking at another aspect of safeguarding practice in education. Thanks for listening.